Diabolical.
Vengeance.
Betrayal.
Bad hair.
Leaning.
Hi, everyone. This is Kimberly.
And this is Katie.
And we have a weekly podcast called A Date with Dateline, a recap of Dateline episodes. We talk about important issues like grainy surveillance footage, cell phone towers, Andrea Canning's white jeans, and Mankey's hankies. We delve into the details of any victim who's ever loved life or lit up a room.
So find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and iTunes to make A Date with Dateline.
And remember, don't watch alone.
A Date with Dateline is a podcast hosted by two professional amateur true crime TV experts with no formal training but evidence lockers filled with snark and uninformed opinions.
You're listening to Scene of the Crime, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, and 3 Men and a Mystery. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
In our last episode, we discussed how the double murder case of Roger Atkinson and Rose Burker dragged on for so long, despite the very best efforts of investigators dedicated to the case. One of the reasons that the gruesome murders of Roger and Rose have remained unsolved after 40 years is that there are still so many basic questions about the case that remain unanswered. One of the most elementary questions in a murder case is whether the victims were targeted. In other words, were these murders the work of someone who knew Roger and Rose, or had they just been assigned the wrong room at the wrong time, and then they were unlucky enough to fall victim to a killer who was not connected to them in any way? If the latter, these kinds of cases are among the hardest to solve because they are so random. There is often no trail leading from the victim back to the killer. DCI Director Shanahan summed it up perfectly in his comments to the press on September 19, 1980. Quote, "We're looking at all possibilities because when something like this happens, you have to figure whoever did it is either mad as hell at the person they're attacking or they got their kicks out of doing this kind of thing." Sheriff Spurrier also seemed to indicate that the suspect could be anyone. You just don't know what you have going by on this interstate. You don't know where they are going and where they are coming from, he said, quoted in the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Rose's family agrees. Margie Lowry.
A lot of silly circumstances that made it difficult to take and decide whether or not, yes, it was somebody that we didn't know or somebody we did know.
Further, the members of law enforcement who worked the case did not agree with each other as to whom the likely culprit was. Margie told us that even the detectives had differing opinions about whether the killer had sought out Roger and Rose specifically.
Everybody had their own opinion.
But then, as we saw in some of the earlier episodes, investigators on the case came to believe that indeed, Roger and Rose were targeted, that the violent rage displayed by the killer, as well as the ripping apart of Roger's wallet, indicated that the killer knew his victims, and the crime was not just happenstance. But there was no general consensus among those who were charged with solving the case as to who was responsible. Paul Holes.
These families have been pointing fingers at each other for 40 years.
As Margie Lowry told us,
even the detectives had their own personal feelings about who, when, where, and why.
Sheriff Rotter.
Again, we're back to which one of these really, really good suspects did this.
There was consensus about only one thing. It was going to take a lot of detective work to solve this case, and indeed, thousands of man-hours went into this investigation. Investigators started from the beginning, constructing a timeline, gaining an understanding of relationships and connections, and interviewing friends and family. Anyone was on the table as a suspect. Of friends and family of the victims, Sheriff Rotter says,
They were all looked at right away.
with so many names in front of them, investigators had to try to narrow down the list of actual viable suspects. Here is Paul Holes.
Pretty much in any case along these lines is that, when you start digging into the victims' lives, everybody has secrets. And sometimes, in any case, those secrets get exposed or potentially get exposed, and that possibly provides motive or other suspect pools. So this is pretty typical, is that you have multiple suspects.
Trying to pinpoint who could have killed the couple, investigators compiled a list of people who they believed knew that Roger and Rose were traveling to Iowa on the weekend of September 12th through 14th. Investigators believed that the couple's killer, if known to them, as is the case in the vast majority of murders, was likely someone who was aware of their Iowa destination, and there were quite a few people who were on this list. It does not seem that Roger and Rose were being particularly cautious about being found out. As we saw, several of Roger's work colleagues in Cahokia knew about his weekend plans and that he was cheating on Marcella. As the DCI put it in their summary, quote, general information was that Roger ran around on his wife. The list of potential suspects that we will now discuss are all people who knew that Roger and Rose would be in the Amana area on Friday, September 12, 1980. There certainly may be more, but let's take a look at those people who the files and witnesses have indicated definitively knew the whereabouts of Roger Atkinson and Rose Burkert. Several of the people who knew about the trip to Iowa were friends of Rose's who were not seriously looked at as suspects. These include the following people: Joanna Young and her fiancé, Eddie Shelton. Joanna was a friend and work colleague of Rose's, the one who was taking care of Rose's pets and plants while she was away with Roger. She was one of Rose's confidants, and Rose and Joanna and Eddie socialized together during the summer of 1980, going to the movies and playing cards, one of Rose's favorite pastimes. Joanna knew all about Rose going to Cahokia to stay with Roger and their trip to the Amanas. Eddie knew about these plans as well. Susie Moore McCush. Susie was another friend and work colleague of Rose's. She knew that Rose was heading to Iowa with a married boyfriend that weekend. She was interviewed at the Andrew County Sheriff's Office on September 14th. This came about not because she was someone who the police notified of Rose's death, but because while Sheriff's Department personnel were discussing the case with the St. Joseph detective Harold Judd, one of the deputies said that he knew Susie Moore had just seen her on the square nearby. He went and got her and brought her in to talk to the investigators. Susie told the men that she had heard that Rose was dead, that she had been killed in a car accident. When she was told that she had been murdered, she said that it was her understanding that Rose had been planning on traveling to Des Moines with Roger. Rose had told her this on the Monday night before she died. She had some interesting things to say about an ex of Rose's, whom we will discuss shortly. As a result of her friendship with Rose, Susie's husband Doyle McCush was looked at by investigators. Apparently, he was already under investigation for burglary charges and had a series of minor crimes such as brandishing a gun, assault, selling alcohol to minors, and vehicular violations under his belt. Despite all this, it does not appear that Doyle was looked at seriously as a suspect. Shirley Robertson and her husband Rondell. Shirley worked with Rose at Laverna Village, and she and her husband played cards with Rose regularly. Shirley and Rondell were the ones who were babysitting Rachel while Rose was away. Rose left Rachel with them at or about noon on Wednesday, September 10th, 1980, and they were aware that she was going to meet a married man, Roger, in Cahokia, and then subsequently go to the Keokuk, Iowa area. Shirley and Rondell had both met Roger several times. Further, Rose called them from the Holiday Inn on Friday night to give them the phone number where she could be reached. Presumably, they were each other's alibi, although their son, James Dean Neal, may also have vouched for their presence in St. Joseph that night. Police looked at the son, James, because they received reports that he had been interested in Rose, but nothing came of this. Another person who knew about the upcoming trip but who was not a suspect was Rita Linninger. Rita was Roger's boss, Randy H's secretary. She told Detective Judd that she had seen Roger on Friday before he left for the Cahokia trip on Monday. Somewhat shockingly, Roger told her that he wanted a divorce, saying that he and his wife were not able to have children. He told Rita that he was seeing someone on the side. Rita said it was an open secret. Roger's coworkers kidded about him having a girlfriend. He often left on his lunch break to go who knows where, she said. She knew about the upcoming getaway Roger was going on with his girlfriend, but it seems there was nothing more to this than Roger chatting casually with his boss's secretary and telling her things he arguably should not have. Then, there are some on the list of people who knew Roger and Rose were headed up to Iowa who were considered suspects, or at least were thoroughly vetted by investigators. Some of them have never been officially cleared. The first of these is Randy H. This was Roger's supervisor at GTE, based in the Savannah office. He was questioned on September 15, 1980, as well as in both 1981 and 1982. In response to investigators' inquiries as to whether Roger's potentially deliberately botched phone line installations had resulted in irate customers who might bear a grudge, Randy said on the contrary, he had received calls from customers complimenting Roger. Randy knew that Roger was seeing someone outside his marriage, and he did not really approve. But he also knew that Roger was taking the weekend off to go to Iowa. He was the one who directed him to the Amanas in lieu of staying in Cahokia in violation of company policy. Randy's alibi for the weekend Roger and Rose were killed was that he and his wife were at his brother Bill's house in Ottawa, Kansas. Interestingly, the St. Joseph News-Press reported on the 24th of September 1980 that DCI agents from Iowa were continuing to investigate in St. Joseph, and one DCI agent was following up on any possible leads in Kansas. We didn't see any records confirming Randy's alibi, but we can only assume that it panned out, since Randy does not seem to top investigators' suspect list. Roger's boss does not seem to have a motive that we know of, making him an unlikely murderer. Then there was Gary S. Gary's brother Ken was married to Roger's sister Betty, and Gary was also an employee of GTE in Savannah. He was aware that Roger was cheating on his wife, and had even drawn a map to help Rose meet up with Roger in Cahokia. He said the last time he saw Roger was when Roger was in the GTE Savannah office that Monday morning when Roger showed up with a hickey. And this part is really weird. Gary told investigators that on September 1st or 2nd, Gary and his and Roger's boss, Randy H., drove out and looked for Rose Burkert's house because they believed that she was the one that Roger was seeing. He said that they were just curious. It was his idea, he believed. They found her driveway with the mailbox saying Burkert. What's more, Gary admitted that in late August, his colleagues Mike H. and Randy Cole, who was also an acquaintance of Rose's from high school, had followed Roger when he left for a lunch break, hoping to see where he was going. Mike H. also admitted to investigators that this was true. He said that Roger frequently disappeared for lunch dates but never told Mike or fellow employees where he was going. So they followed him one time to try to check out the girlfriend. This is all so strange. With all these people spying on the lovebirds, it's no wonder that Rose felt that she was being followed. And it's clear that lots and lots of people were overly interested in Roger Atkison's affair with her. Gary S. was married with 3 kids and told police that on September 12th, he worked for GTE in Savannah until about 5 p.m., and then he went home to his wife and 3 kids and went out with his wife that night. He worked on Saturday as well, and then learned of Roger's murder on the night of September 13th when his brother Ken, Roger's brother-in-law in Idaho, called him around 10:30 p.m. Gary then called over to Larry and Elizabeth Atkinson's farm, where he informed Mike H., who answered the phone, of the news. A couple more strange facts about Gary S. and his link to Roger and Rose. Gary told investigators that on Saturday, September 13th, around 7:15 p.m., so 3 hours before he says he knew that Roger and his girlfriend had been killed, he and Randy Cole, the one who knew Rose from high school, drove by Rose Burkert's house to see if Roger was there with her for the weekend. When they drove by the house, there were no vehicles and the house was dark. At this time, Roger and Rose were dead in a hotel room hundreds of miles and a whole state away. And only the Iowa authorities and the killer knew it. One more thing, according to Roger's brother, Larry,
Gary was scheduled to go, and Roger traded and took Gary's shift so he could stay up there for whatever period of time.
Gary said in his April 1981 interview with investigators that Roger had wanted the Cahokia assignment so he could get away from his wife. Gary was interviewed several times and agreed to provide his fingerprints and take a polygraph. If he did so, we do not know the results. Presumably, his alibi checked out because he was never arrested, charged, or named a person of interest, even though the files we reviewed contain a notation that at least one witness told police that Gary S. was dangerous. The upshot of all this stuff with Randy H., Randy Cole, and Gary S. Roger's colleagues knew about Roger's motives for taking the Cahokia shift and that he would be there with his lover far in advance. And many of them knew about the weekend detour to Iowa. Now we will discuss some people who knew about the Amana trip who were on the suspect list and, as far as we know, have never been 100% cleared. The first of these is Mike H. Mike H. is the brother-in-law of Roger's who was married to Roger's sister, Rita. The couple lived in St. Joseph. Mike also worked with Roger at GTE's Savannah office. In fact, he is the one who got Roger that job several years earlier. Mike was in a separate department, but he and Roger interacted quite a bit. Mike and Roger had met in 1972 when Mike married Roger's sister, Rita, and they were close enough that Mike was an usher in Roger and Marcella's wedding in 1973. He was also a pallbearer at Roger's funeral. When Roger was killed, Mike accompanied Larry Atkinson to Iowa to identify Roger's body. Here is Larry Atkinson.
Mike told me that he would be down the next morning and pick me up to take me up to ID Roger because nobody else was going to do it, and the sheriff wanted to know who was going to, and told him I would, and so Mike said he would be back down. Now they lived 25, 30 miles north of us, but Mike would drive back down to pick me up to take me up to Iowa.
We have access to several transcripts of conversations investigators had with Mike. He was interviewed 3 times in the week after Roger's death, again in 1981, and at length when the case was re-examined in 1993 pursuant to a tip in the case. At that time, he was interviewed by DCI Special Agent Benson as well as Sheriff Slockett, who was still struggling to solve this case 13 years later. It is interesting to compare Mike's statements in all these interviews, and it is worth noting that the DCI files say repeatedly that Mike H.'s information did not match up with what other witnesses told them, and there were notable inconsistencies in his remarks to investigators. Before we get into Mike's statements, let's take a look at the role we know Mike played in the events surrounding Roger's murder. In their last phone conversation on Tuesday, September 9th, Roger asked Mike to take a car, we aren't sure which one, home from the GTE Savannah office for him while he was in Cahokia that week. Mike left Roger's car at Roger's home, but there is a reference to him driving Rose's car as well. Mike knew an awful lot about Roger's personal life. He was aware that Roger was having an affair with a nurse's aide from a local nursing home who generally had Wednesdays off. He also knew that Marcella did not know about the affair. He said he had warned Roger about keeping the illicit relationship on the down low out of fear that Roger might lose his job. Roger told Mike that his girl had 3 days off work during the week of September 8th and that she was coming to Cahokia to stay with him. Mike also knew that Roger and his paramour were going to the Amanas on the weekend of September 12th, as he was in Randy H's office when Roger called and Randy made that recommendation. Mike told at least 2 other people about Roger's liaison in Iowa, his wife Rita and another colleague named Phil Zimmerman. He also discussed it with Gary S., who knew about the liaison in the Amanas as well, as did another colleague, Randy Cole. But in his 1993 interview, Mike denied having any knowledge that Rose was going to Cahokia, Missouri to visit Roger on September 8, 1980. Investigators tried to get to the bottom of just how much Mike H. knew ahead of time. They asked him whether he knew that Roger was seeing Rose Burkert specifically, and he gave several conflicting statements about this. Mike told DCI Special Agent Benson that he knew the name of Roger's girlfriend because it had been mentioned by colleagues. He said that he learned Rose's name through the rumor mill at work, not from Roger. He said he and Roger had discussed Roger's affair only once, when Roger told him that it appealed to him that his lover had a little girl, and Mike told him that he should think about what he was doing. But in 1993, when asked if he suspected Roger of being involved in an extramarital affair, he stated he was aware that Roger was seeing someone, but did not know the identity of the woman. He said he recalled one incident in which he told Roger that he did not want to know who Roger was seeing. He first became aware of the name Rose Burkert after being informed that she was killed alongside Roger. Now, as you can hear, this does not mesh at all with what Mike told investigators in the first months of the investigation. He did know Rose's name. He had learned it from buddies at work, if not from Roger himself. Some of the inconsistencies that we can point to in Mike's interviews are bizarre, if not suspicious, but they all add up to Mike not being entirely truthful with investigators. In his September 14, 1980 interview at St. Luke's Hospital in Iowa, he told DCI Special Agent Benson that he and Roger were not close and that Roger was not likely to confide in him. Yet we know that Roger talked to him about his affair. Not only that, but it seemed Roger generally told Mike very personal things. Rita, Mike's wife, told police that Mike told her that Roger was thinking of filing for divorce when he got back from the trip. This means that Roger was sharing with Mike information that he wasn't sharing with his own sister. Furthermore, in his 1993 interview, Mike told investigators that he and Roger were close. Which was it? And why was Mike anxious to distance himself from Roger in September 1980? Others attested to the fact that Mike H. and Roger were close friends. DCI agents Ron Maurer and Dick Gregory noted that they had been told by multiple people that Roger and Mike were tight. One of these was Nellie Hatcher, Marcella's mother, who was interviewed during the investigation. And she pointed the finger right at Mike H. She said that Mike was always around Roger at the time preceding his death. She characterized their relationship as very close. Nellie told investigators that they should check Mike H. out because she felt that he knew more than he had let on, and that he may have even been responsible for killing Roger. She said that after the deaths, she learned that Mike knew beforehand about Roger's extramarital affair and that he had knowledge that the victim was traveling to Iowa for that purpose. Nellie observed that Mike behaved very strangely at Roger's funeral and would not look at the body. And DCI notes state, this reporting agent did observe Michael H. at the funeral, and he took the death of Roger Atkinson extremely hard. Was Roger's death perhaps weighing on Mike's conscience? Another example of Mike H.'s duplicity. Larry Atkinson told us that Mike volunteered to drive with him up to Iowa to ID Roger's body. But in 1993, Mike told investigators that on that Sunday morning, referring to September 14, 1980, he received a call from Larry Atkinson asking him to travel with Larry to the Amanas to assist him with identifying the body. He agreed to this request. This inconsistency about whose idea it was for Mike to go along could just be a memory lapse, or it could be Mike trying to downplay his level of involvement and interest 13 years later. Other inconsistencies did cross the line into being suspicious. In his initial interview with the DCI in Iowa on September 14th, Mike told DCI Special Agent Benson that he was in Randy H.'s office on September 11th when Roger called, and he heard the conversation where Randy told Roger to take his girlfriend up to the Amanas. But then, in his follow-up interview on the 17th, 3 days later, with DCI Special Agent Ron Maurer, the transcript says that, quote, Mike was in the office and overheard a conversation between Roger and Randy H. Mike, however, denied that he could get any specifics concerning what the conversation was about and denied having any knowledge that Roger was going to the Amana Colonies in Iowa. Then, in his interview the next day, on the 18th, he again affirmed that he had overheard the Amana conversation and knew about Roger's trip. We know that the first story was true, that he was in Randy's office and heard all about the Amanas because Gary S. verified it. So why did Mike lie in the second interview and then reverse course again? All the flip-flopping was so overt, DCI investigators' notes stated flat out that they knew Mike was not being truthful with them. So Mike H. had a lot of suspicious behavior, stories that kept changing, and things that didn't quite add up. Let's look at the actions that would seem to cast suspicion on Mike. Here is Larry Atkinson.
He drove me up to Iowa, and when we got up there, he drove to the hotel. I think there was only one there. And we drove to the back parking lot, and then he pulled up beside a dumpster, and he said that he had a rotten watermelon in his trunk that he wanted to get rid of in case those investigators wanted to search his car. I didn't get out to see what he was throwing in. Whatever he threw in the dumpster, he did, and then we drove up to a set of stairs, and he parked in the back end of the hotel, and we went up the stairs, and right there at the end of the hall was the room. Why would he think that they would have even considered searching his car? There was way too many things that Mike did.
What on earth was going on with this rotting watermelon story? He couldn't have thrown that out in St. Joseph before the 4-hour drive to Iowa? And why was he so sure that investigators would be searching his vehicle? Sadly, if he threw away anything of evidentiary value, it is long gone. Here is Sheriff Rotter.
It looks like that the dumpsters were already searched before that. So if Mike would have thrown something away, it would never have been discovered by the people looking in the dumpsters.
Something else Mike did not add up. Again, here is Larry.
Mike asked that investigator if Roger had a key ring on him with keys, and the guy checked, and sure enough he did. And he said, well, there's company keys on that key ring, and the company needed those keys. And that investigator brought the key ring out and let Mike rifle through them and take keys off that he said he needed. I talked to another guy that worked with Roger and with Mike at the phone company and asked, and his name's Gary. He's related to my sister. Anyway, he told me he was stunned. He said he didn't need those keys. He said the company had duplicates, many of all those keys. Why did he need those keys? I told him I don't know, and I don't know what keys he took off of it. But it just was a strange thing.
Larry also found it strange that Mike seemed to know his way all around the Amana area.
Then we went to a hospital, and he seemed to know where he was going everywhere.
But Mike admitted that he had been up to the Amanas before. His interview notes state, quote, he had been to the Amanas himself because he attended a training center in Grinnell. On occasion, they would eat at the Amana Colonies. He denied ever having been to the Holiday Inn. Mike denied telling anyone where the murders took place because at the time he did not know. He advised that he was only aware that it occurred at the Amanas. But Larry tells us that Mike seemed to know just where to go to find the crime scene investigators, the Holiday Inn, even though they had been told to meet agents at St. Luke's Hospital. Then, something else happened in Iowa that we have a record of. When Larry and Mike were at St. Luke's to identify Roger, they were both asked to submit to interviews. These interview sessions were conducted by DCI Special Agent Benson at the hospital on Sunday the 14th, and the first lines of Mike H's interview transcript read as follows, quote, Mike H. specifically requested not to go to the morgue for identification purposes. When the reporting agent informed Mike H. that he desired to speak with him, Mike H. inquired, I'm not a suspect, am I? He explained his concern because his wife had just recently had a baby. This was certainly odd. Mike accompanied Larry to Iowa to provide support in the difficult act of identifying his dead brother's corpse. And then Mike refused to actually see the body. Larry found the whole thing with IDing Roger's body to be strange.
Met with somebody, I don't know if it was a coroner or who it was, and said, well, we need to go. I think we went down the floor to ID Roger, and Mike said at that time, told me, he said, I can't do it. I'm staying up here. But anyway, I went down and identified Roger.
It was bizarre that Mike had volunteered to accompany Larry to identify Roger, but then had refused to go through with it. Even more alarming was that Mike had asked right off the bat if he was a suspect. On top of the watermelon story where he told Larry he was concerned about his car being searched, this raises all sorts of red flags. On September 17th, DCI Special Agent Ron Maurer again sat down with Mike H. and asked him about why, when he spoke with Agent Benson on the 14th, he was so quickly concerned that he would be considered a suspect. Mike said he had no explanation for this. In addition, Larry and Elizabeth Atkinson were witness to a possible argument or confrontation between Roger and Mike that had occurred the week before Roger died.
About a week before, Roger stopped by Rita and Mike's house, and Roger and Mike, Rita says, went downstairs to the rec room, and they had some conversation. And when they were through, Roger come up and left. And she said that it was very unusual that Roger didn't tell her goodbye and everything, but he just come up and left. And she felt there was something there but she didn't know what it was, that they had a discussion.
Mike seemed to take an excessive interest in Roger's affair. We know that he admitted to following Roger when Roger left for one of his mysterious lunches. Mike consistently denied knowing who Roger was seeing, but we know that he did know who Rose was. He said in another instance that he learned her name through the grapevine at work. And Mike seemed to know where Rose lived.
Mike had taken a drive past Rose's house or area with his brother-in-law, because it's kind of complicated, but his sister Betty married Kenny. His brother is Gary, who also worked with Roger and Mike. So Gary, and I think that was the Saturday morning, but I could be wrong, Gary and Mike took a drove through Savannah and Mike pointed out, well, Rose lived in that area down there in that house. And that's all Gary remembers. But he knew where the girl lived.
Of course, this was in a time before social media, when checking up on someone had to be done in person, not through cyber stalking. But Mike seemed to take it to the extreme. According to Larry and Elizabeth Atkinson, Sheriff Slockett told them something else bizarre about Mike H's behavior.
Slockett even told us that he, and I don't know if it was a deputy with him or whatever, came down to St. Joe for interviews, and they stayed overnight. And what was it, Mike?
Went to the hotel.
2, 3 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Mike was knocking at their door at the hotel, and evidently they had some conversation. But Slockett told us he could never really figure out why Mike came to their hotel that night.
He said he felt like Mike had something he wanted to say, but couldn't pick up the nerve to say it, and eventually just left.
At the end of the September 17, 1980 interview, it said, quote, "It should be noted that Mike H. did not readily volunteer any information during the interview and primarily would only answer the questions asked in as few details as possible. It should also be noted that there are several discrepancies between the information given by Mike H. and the other information given by various other GTE employees. There were more inconsistencies and changing stories. Mike was re-interviewed at the Andrew County Sheriff's Office on April 28, 1981 by Special Agent Larry Gopel of the DCI. The DCI synopsis of the interview states the purpose was, quote, "to question Mike concerning statements he allegedly made that he would not talk further about the case unless he was held under subpoena or something to the effect that, quote, suppose the individual that did it went to jail for 12 or 13 years and got out and came after his family, as well as the fact that he would not talk to Marcella Atkinson about the case nor her investigator in reference to the same." When asked why he would repeatedly make statements that he did not want to get involved because the killer might come back after 12 years and kill him and his family members, Mike advised that he did not know. Apparently, Mike had voiced these somewhat bizarre concerns about the suspect getting out and harming his family to both his wife Rita and to Larry Atkinson. It should be noted that Mike told investigative agents that he had no idea who was responsible for Roger's death, but all of the discrepancies in his responses were clearly enough for investigators to add Mike to the suspect list because in March 1981, he was asked to submit his finger and palm prints for comparison purposes. They also ran a records check on him. It came up with nothing. So what was Mike's alibi for the night of the murders? Mike said that on September 12, 1980, he worked for GTE until approximately 4 or 5 o'clock p.m. After that, he went home. He did not recall going anywhere else and thinks he remained at home with his wife the entire evening. He then went to his mother's residence at approximately 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. Then he said that later on the 13th, he and Rita and Larry and Elizabeth had left around 6:30 and driven 30 miles south of St. Joseph to attend a street festival. They got back to Larry's around 9 to 10 p.m., and the sheriff was waiting for them. This was when Mike answered the call from Gary S., who told him that Roger had been killed. Mike's wife Rita backed this alibi up, sort of. In a 1982 interview, she told police that she believed Mike was home with her on that Friday night after working until 5 that day, and that she doesn't think they went anywhere. She stated they knew they were going somewhere Saturday, so they probably stayed home. She admitted that she did not always know where he is or what he is doing, and that he would often leave for hours and she would have no idea where he was going. She did recall that on Saturday the 13th, they went to visit her brother's family, this is Larry and Elizabeth, to go to the street festival. So we have Mike saying he thinks he stayed home that night, and his wife saying she thinks they stayed in that evening. Not exactly a rock-solid alibi. And Larry and Elizabeth Atkinson challenge it.
He hung around with Gary at work because Gary had a late shift at the telephone company, and he hung around with him to about 6. Supposedly he left there and I guess went home to Rita, but Rita doesn't remember what time he came in because she was already asleep. The next morning, supposedly he got up and went to his parents' house to have breakfast, and then after that, it's when he went up back to the telephone company to go with Gary to ride around, because apparently they would have shifts to where they rode around or were available if there was telephone trouble. And that's during that time that he identified where Rose lived.
Gary told me he was kind of puzzled why Mike wanted to hang out with him then, because Mike wasn't on the clock.
So it sounds like all we really know is that Mike went to work that day and then was probably home. Of course, one hopes that Rita, Roger's sister, would not cover for her husband if he was unaccounted for on the night that her brother was killed. Investigators also seem to consider a different angle, one tangentially involving Mike. They appeared to be wondering whether Marcella had recently found out about Roger's affair, and whether she could have learned about it from Mike H. Mike told them that he was aware that Marcella had never liked him. Here is Marcella talking to us about Mike H.
I knew him as much as you can on a situation like that. Wasn't real close to Mike because I didn't care for Mike. Our personalities did not mesh.
Admittedly, Mike did not like her either because he considered her very domineering. DCI Special Agent Ron Mauer's interview notes say, quote, Mike was also very concise concerning the fact that he and Marcella, Roger's wife, do not get along at all. He stated the reason he and Marcella do not get along was because Marcella tries to run the house and he does not feel that's the way it should be. Mike acknowledged as true something that Marcella had told investigators, that he refused to speak with the private investigator hired by Marcella to look into Roger's murder. This is strange, right? If he was a good friend of Roger's, wouldn't he want to help solve his murder in any way possible? Investigators wondered whether Mike could have told Marcella about the affair because he didn't care for her and wanted to destroy her and Roger's marriage. Mike denied telling Marcella anything, but he admitted that he felt that Marcella suspected that Roger was having an extramarital affair. Funnily enough, when asked if he ever told his wife, Rita, about her brother's affair, he advised that he did not believe so because they never communicated. He told investigators that the two never talked, which was one of the reasons for their divorce in 1985. Ironically, Rita said that Mike had told her about the affair, and he generally told her most things. Another thing came up in Mike's 1993 interview that remains a very big question. Sheriff Slockett informed Mike H. that in Roger and Rose's hotel room, they had found items on the floor that had been removed from Roger's wallet. And some of these things were torn up. One of the items was a photograph of Mike's daughter, Janine. When asked why the assailant would tear up the picture of his child, Mike had no answer. One of the DCI agents then asked Mike why someone was trying to frame him. He responded again that he did not know. Needless to say, it is very, very strange that the photo of Mike's little girl was torn to bits when other materials from Roger's billfold were left intact. Why would the killer have anything invested in this child? Was someone trying to point the finger at Mike? Or was Mike himself responsible? One line of questioning that we saw in Mike H's interviews gives us some insight into something investigators were considering. They asked Mike H. whether GTE employees wear work gloves. He stated in response that they were issued work gloves by the company that were made of leather and brown jersey material. He described them as having a high cuff. They were designed for climbing and preventing splinters. After being asked about tools, he indicated that employees sometimes supplemented the supplies of tools that are provided by GTE, but that the company did not encourage this practice. Of course, we know that the GTE work crew was given machetes for clearing brush, and a man wearing gloves and wielding a machete who knew where Roger and Rose were going and seemed to take excessive interest in their affair was very intriguing to investigators. Another thing that Mike H. admitted to was interesting. He said that on the 16th of September, this was just days after Roger's murder, he went to dinner with Robin Atkinson. This was the brother of Roger who had been engaged to a woman named Tony, with whom Mike had an affair that Robin reportedly blamed on Roger. Mike told investigators that at this dinner, he confessed to Robin that it was not Roger who had been dating Tony, resulting in the breakup of Robin's engagement, but he himself. He said that he had told Robin all this because, quote, this had been bothering him and he wanted to tell Robin and get it off his chest. In conjunction with his 1981 interview, Mike was asked to submit a polygraph exam and he agreed. If that took place, we do not have any records of it, but we do have the results of a polygraph he took in March of 1993, 13 years after the murders. The purpose of the exam was stated as designed to test whether Mike had any knowledge or involvement in the deaths of Roger and Rose. Here are the questions and the results. Last September 12, 1980, did you cause Roger or Rose's injuries? Answer, no. Were you the one that caused those injuries to Roger or Rose? Answer, no. Did you do anything to cause Roger or Rose's death? Answer, no. The results line reads, quote, the subject's polygrams contained response inconsistencies and erratic tracing abnormalities on the relevant questions above. The polygraph test continued, giving Mike a peak of tension test, asking him the following question and substituting the last word. Quote, do you know if the word written on the bathroom door was, and then filling in a word at the end. This was done 6 times, and the words filled in were, in this order, help, that, damn, this, stop, and kill. The results line reads, quote, the subject's polygrams contained consistent, specific responses indicative of emotional stress on question D of the relevant questions listed above. It should be noted that question D is the correct answer. As we know, the word this was found on the back of the bathroom door in room 260. The overall results of the polygraph exam were stated, quote, after careful analysis of the subject's polygrams based on the case facts available, it is the examiner's opinion that his truthfulness could not be verified and he could not be cleared in this matter. It is also noted, when given the opportunity to explain these responses, the subject gave no explanation for their occurrence. Mike's wife Rita, Roger's sister, was interviewed on March 11, 1982 by DCI Special Agent Larry Goppel and St. Joseph detectives John Muhlenbacher and Ron Fisher. Rita confirmed for detectives what was already pretty clear, that an awful lot of people knew about Roger's affair. She said she had known about the relationship for a couple of weeks since being told about it by her husband, Mike. She had never heard anything about the relationship from her brother Roger. She confirmed that she knew that Roger's girlfriend was going to stay with him on the job in Cahokia and that they were going up to Iowa. She learned all of this from her husband. She said that she did not tell Marcella about the relationship and she did not believe Mike did either. She confirmed also that Marcella called the house on Saturday morning wanting to talk to Mike. She was unsure as to why, but she knew that Marcella was desperate to locate Roger. And we've already addressed what Rita told investigators about Mike's alibi. So what on earth would Mike H's motive have been to kill his good friend and brother-in-law, Roger Atkinson? Well, here it is. Mike admitted that at the time of the murders, although he was married to Roger's sister, Rita, he was dating a woman named Anita. He had been dating her for 2 to 3 months. And guess who else he said had spoken with Anita several times and even asked her out around the same time? You guessed it. None other than his buddy, Roger Atkinson. And furthermore, Roger knew that Mike H. was dating Anita and cheating on his sister. Could Roger have threatened to tell Rita about Mike's affair? Or could Mike have been jealous of Roger's interest in his girl? Or both? Murders have happened over less. Larry and Elizabeth believe that perhaps Mike had his reasons for doing away with Roger or wanting to. They said,
I don't think Mike was the killer, but I think he knew about it.
Mike had
Or
all
could
the
have driven.
information, and I don't picture Mike swinging a weapon because he's a nervous ninny. He always is.
But he was very conniving.
Oh, yeah.
I know it was Mike that taught Roger how to be able to pick up telephone conversations and how you did that.
Marcella, on the other hand, believes Mike's motive could have been something else.
Well, I had heard that Roger was up for a promotion, and I don't know if that would have been something that Mike should have maybe gotten instead. And then I wondered if there was some jealousy that related to that situation, if that's the case, if he was up for a promotion at that time. Also, since he was a womanizer, I wondered if there had been some kind of connection between him and Rose at one time, or he tried to make a connection with her.
So, Mike H. looks like a good suspect for the murders of Roger and Rose based on all the things we just discussed. But Sheriff Rotter, who has actually interviewed Mike in the past few years, isn't so sure. Here is Sheriff Rotter.
I have a theory about maybe not necessarily the watermelon, but why he seems kind of guilty. And that it's because he had his own indiscretions that he was keeping quiet at the time. He was not being faithful to his wife at the time, and he had to be very, very careful what he said because he had his own problems. So, and I don't think those problems were related to the murders. I think it was a personal issue that he was trying to deal with and trying to keep quiet about, and then maybe got exposed through the questioning that followed for the murders. His polygraph result is one of those that's inconclusive. It's one that it points out that maybe he's not being entirely truthful, and I think that again he was being maybe guarding of certain information because it exposed some of the things that he was up to. I don't believe that he's our killer. I don't believe he ever had a motive. They're actually very good friends, and it just doesn't make sense. And I've since talked to him, and he's very willing to talk about it. He remembers things pretty well. Everybody has a little bit of trouble remembering something that happened so long ago, but as far as where he was and what he was doing, he's very straightforward with that, and comes clean about the fact that he had some things going on in his life that were going on with his marriage and that, and perhaps explains why he maybe didn't do so well on the polygraph back then. Put yourself in his position when they're asking him his timeline and where he is, and he knows he's in places and with people that he can't talk about. How's that going to display itself on a polygraph? He's definitely not telling the truth. Yeah. Now, did they, the questions that they ask are very, very broad. They don't get into to minute details. But if you're nervous because you don't know what they're going to ask and you think your indiscretion is going to be exposed here in front of the world, you're going to be pretty nervous. So I can see why his polygraph doesn't look so good. I don't really consider him a very viable suspect in this case.
Paul Holes agrees.
What is involved with, I think now he's going, oh shit, this guy that knows the secrets of our group is just killed, and that law enforcement's going to be digging into what he was doing, which is going to expose what we have been doing. I could lose my job. If I'm doing criminal stuff, I could be arrested. I think he's ending up protecting his ass because of that, not because he was involved in Rose and Roger's homicide. The way I look at it, he was a bad influence on Roger. He was, within the telephone company, it sounds like there was a group of them that was, while they're on duty, they're womanizing. They may have been involved in some criminal activity. And Roger kind of, was more of a follower, and he, of course, wanted to be accepted by this group.
This concludes episode 5. Please join us next week as we continue discussion of suspects for the murders of Roger and Rose. If you have any information about the murders of Roger Atkinson and Rose Burkert, please contact the Iowa County Sheriff's Office at 319-642-7307. Scene of the Crime is a production of AbJack Entertainment. It's narrated by me, Jamie Rice, and co-produced by Jessica Betancourt, Gray Hughes, and Mike Morford. It's written by Jessica Betancourt. Special thanks goes out to the family members and friends of Roger Atkinson and Rose Burkert who participated in this podcast. Thanks also goes out to Sheriff Rob Rotter and the Iowa County Sheriff's Department, Paul Holes, Ron Fisher, Tim Trishman, and Ida Block. If you'd like to help Scene of the Crime reach new listeners, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please recommend this podcast to your friends. You can find Scene of the Crime on Twitter at Scene of Crime Pod and on Facebook.